Welcome to Prospecting Purpose, where we explore mining's role in shaping a sustainable, socially just, and brighter future. I'm Liz Friel, your host for the series, with a rotating guest on every episode. Have you noticed the way as an industry, we talk about the life of mine as this distinct thing that lives in its own world, apart from the system around it, a world that ends upon closure? Do you struggle with how blindly we still focus on ceasing our activity versus transitioning the land we've been doing those activities on to the people who remain long after those activities have ceased? Have you wondered how those transitions could be done better so that the site, the company, and the industry leaves a positive, lasting legacy with the public? Well, that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. Joining us on the show, we have Peter Whitbread Abertat, CEO of social enterprise consultancy Future Terrains, based in England. A seasoned mining closure and environmental specialist, he was also one of the masterminds behind a very unique book called 101 Things to Do with a Hole in the Ground. With over 30 years of global closure-related experience, Pete is truly passionate about rebuilding ecological integrity and enhancing community well-being in post-mining areas. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.
Pleasure to have you. So you've been working in this area of closure for about 3 decades now, and you've surely seen a lot and learned a lot during that time. So this closure thing wasn't always the topic of conversation, right? We only saw the word closure really popularized in the mid-1970s. What have you seen happen with the evolution of closure during your time in the field?
Well, I was only a very, very young boy in the 1970s, of course. But I was aware of, it was in the late 60s and the 1970s in particular, a growing, certainly in Western developed economies, a growing public awareness of environmental issues. Media presence on these issues as well, things like David Attenborough's Life on Earth programme. That was a key turning point to get me involved in environmental issues. And what I've seen happening over that period is what that phrase mine closure actually means has evolved into something that's more than just closing the gates and walking away, which is what used to happen, and more of a, I would like to say, a more progressive, responsible attitude in some companies towards leaving behind a positive legacy when the mine closes, environmentally and socio-economically as well. I would say still there's some key major challenges to achieving that more broadly around the world, around how to leave a viable post-mining communities, for example. You know, once a mine might have been central to a community's existence for generations and decades, and if that mine suddenly goes, suddenly there's a massive economic impact and a massive social impact and often a cultural impact as well. And too often that problem still hasn't been fixed by the broader mining industry. And when I talk about the mining industry, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of companies out there doing a good job, but there's an awful lot that are still doing the bare minimum or worse.
Right. I mean, the industry has become so good at managing so many impacts, but overall, still not so much this one. And so what's important to celebrate about the mining industry's progress in this area? Because it's obviously not all doom and gloom.
Well, certainly during the 25 or 30 years I've been involved in the mining sector, there have been significant improvements in mine closure as an issue. So in most jurisdictions around the world now, if not all of them, there is a requirement to produce a mine closure plan, for example. There's also a lot of legislation and regulation in most jurisdictions around setting aside finance, sometimes quite a lot of finance, during the operational phase of the mine as a closure bond to pay for mine closure.
Right.
One thing that is very good recently is a plethora out there of really good mine closure guidance produced by industry leaders like ICMM. And that's only been out a couple of years. So once that starts to embed in responsible mining companies' systems, that kind of stuff should really make a difference, I hope.
But for the moment, we're really stuck in this starting and ending with the hole in the ground. I mean, there was something there before this mine, and there will be something there long after. So I want to chat to you a little bit about the best-selling book, 101 Things to Do with a Hole in the Ground, which you were very involved in. And it had all sorts of stories of post-mining possibilities from your own research. So tell me, what do the success stories have in common in your experience?
So one of the benefits of looking at a diverse range of projects across a number of different geographies and cultures and things is you can unpick generic common challenges and see how those were addressed under those different conditions. So the 4 general areas are how these projects are governed, how we encourage meaningful participation, project sustainability, i.e. how do you make a project sustainable after the mining company is gone. And then there's a bunch of cross-cutting issues, which I call the oil in the machine, which are things like acquiring the knowledge, collaboration, proper leadership, emphasising creativity and beauty. And really, really importantly, when it comes to mining, cultural aspects are definitely cross-cutting.
And what about those success stories do you think would most surprise the mining industry?
Well, there's a bunch of examples out there, and a lot of them are in that book, 101 Things to Do with the Hole in the Ground. And a good example would be the Eden Project, which is a transformational botanical garden and visitor attraction built in an old China clay quarry in the middle of Cornwall. And I was involved in that project for 12 years. It opened 20 years ago, and in that time it's generated well over £1 billion of extra added value to the local economy, which is far more than the mine ever added to the economy in 160 years of operations. And that project didn't come out of a mining company. That was destined to become a landfill site. That was a level of ambition. So the Eden Project was visualised and developed by people who weren't mining industry people, who weren't mining companies. It was a bunch of creative people, architects, artists, civil engineers, horticulturists, all working together. Most of them were local already, who managed to come together around this idea for doing something really unique and different and important. And that's what's happened. And it's a grand scale, high profile project, but there's many hundreds of other projects around the world that follow a similar pattern of development on old mine sites, where local people see an opportunity around a derelict piece of land to do something different that adds value to their existence, their society. And then in other cases, there's, for example, if you look at the old lignite mining fields of eastern Germany, that was a government mandated programme costing billions of euros over many, many years to restore that entire landscape, covering tens of thousands of hectares of eastern Germany into new land uses, stable ground, new tourism attractions, musical venues, water sports. There's loads of examples of really good projects that have happened on old mine sites that have not been developed by mines. So that underlines a point that the more you can incorporate other stakeholders outside the mining industry or outside the mining company into your thinking around how you're going to close that mine, the more value you could get out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'm really hopeful when I hear stories like those. In the past decade or so, we've seen these new terms come around that sort of reflect these kinds of stories, like social closure. We're seeing inclusive and asset-based community development approaches be pulled in. More recently, we saw the emergence of transition, particularly social transition. And that really excites me as a practitioner. The ICMM guidelines, for example, have some great best practice detail. And all this certainly reflects the evolution of thinking in the field. I'm curious how you think leadership thinking and objectives have changed lately, in your opinion, alongside those changes that we're seeing in the field and in the public.
When we talk about social transition as opposed to social closure, it does better describe what actually happens on the ground when a mine stops operating. The society is still there, but it's a process of transition going on from a mining society to a post-mining society. But what I've been saying for years, the whole term mine closure could also be called mining transition for exactly those reasons. Think about the landscape where that mine sits. That mine might only be there for a few years or a few decades, but the landscape might have been there for thousands of years, if not millions of years in some places.
Yeah.
There's a story around that landscape, a narrative, a natural history story, and a social and cultural history story as well. And that mine occupies one small chapter in that whole narrative. Okay, so what we need to do when we close a mine is not think about that as an end point, but think about that as setting up the scene for the start of the next chapter in that landscape narrative, and the people associated with it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
If companies properly start implementing the best practice guidance that's around, then I'm quite optimistic about the future. There'll always be places where it's not implemented properly.
Sure.
But we don't have to go that far back in history. Just a couple of decades where it wasn't implemented properly anywhere. So we are moving forward, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. So despite our progress, I want to know what still frustrates you.
Oh, I thought we only had 45 minutes. The big challenge, the really big challenge, is how to do social transitioning, social closure properly. That still isn't bottomed out properly. And it's not just a mining company issue either, it's a government issue as well. That's one thing that really frustrates me. There's another big frustration is, what do we do about abandoned mines, of which there are tens of thousands around the world.
Yes.
Mines that no longer are owned by a company and have moved by default into the public sector ownership, still spewing out toxic water and causing social problems as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I take the example here in Canada, there's the National Orphaned and Abandoned Mines Initiative. There are literally thousands in that inventory.
Yeah, absolutely. Another frustration I have, because I've been doing it for a long time now, is reading and writing and reviewing mine closure plans. And just about every single one I've ever read, and I'm probably never going to work again after I've said this, but just about every mine closure plan I've ever read significantly underestimates the cost of its mine closure bond.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of frustrations. I know you could go on about them all day. There's one frustration in particular that I want to ask you about, and that's this spiral of decline thing that I've been seeing a lot here in North America and presumably all over the world for communities that are experiencing mine closure. Can you describe a bit about that challenge and from what you've seen, how it can be prevented?
Okay, so the term spiral of decline is quite depressing. It's not a far out theoretical issue. You can see it happening in front of your eyes. So if a mine has been the central focal point economically, socially and culturally for a community for decades or generations, and then that mine suddenly closes, the effects of that closure are directly and indirectly unemployment, reduced income to the communities in terms of lost wages, lost taxes and lost philanthropy, a massive degraded environment on the doorstep of the community, and eventually a loss of cultural references that might have stood there for 100 years. And then what happens in these communities is the educated and the ambitious and the young leave, and you get an ageing population. When communities enter that phase, then there's less money available for fixing a degraded environment, less money available for community infrastructure, etc., which feeds back into the whole effects on individuals and families, makes the situation worse. So you enter this spiral of decline where it becomes self-reinforcing. That spiral of decline thing is a very, very difficult thing to break. The best thing is not to let it happen in the first place, obviously.
Yeah. So if we look to the future, the world has obviously changed a lot since the book. And I'm sure you're seeing all sorts of new opportunities to derive value from closed or abandoned mines. I can envision a future where we use mine sites to serve other emerging industries, where we create circular industrial parks, for example, with server farms for cloud data or blockchain applications, and greenhouses and aquaculture to support local food security and the local economy. I'm wondering if you've seen anything like this so far. Like, I'm convinced the future has to hold this, but I'm wondering if you've seen anything like this to date.
I've heard about it, and I've seen things on the internet and on television. That has to be one of the solutions for people looking for deep, underground, safe, stable environmental situations that are cool, naturally air-conditioned in a lot of cases.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of mines are set for closure in the coming years all over the world. This is a big issue in the industry. What do you think are some of the biggest considerations that mining companies need to be bearing in mind to really foster this necessary mindset shift from closure to transition at the end of mine life?
If we want to foster the kinds of progressive mine closure, mine transition that we're talking about, it has to get out of being just a mining company problem. And that involves bringing in other stakeholders who are going to be involved in that project long after the mine's gone. The other key thing as well is considering the mine as a piece of a puzzle or a jigsaw connected to all the other pieces of a jigsaw outside the mine, looking at where they can connect and add value with the closure project, rather than focusing inwards and just the thought processes end at the boundaries of the mine.
Absolutely. What do you think it could look like if we did? What's your vision for closure done well, industry-wide, globally?
My vision is that it ceases to become an issue because it's no longer a story. People just assume a mining company is going to build, operate, and close a mine according to good practice, leaving a viable post-mining community behind, and a sustainable environmental landscape.
It's definitely a vision I think we can get behind, I should say. It's definitely a vision I can get behind. So Pete, when you think about the future of mine closure, what are you most excited about and what scares or worries you?
So what scares me is that nothing changes or things just get worse. You know, we're dealing with, in many countries, a disruptive force that's passing through global politics at the moment. And what excites me, I would like to think that, for example, the ICMM Good Practice Guidance, which is really, really good, I would like to think that that is being implemented widely, very widely and very well around the world. And I'd love to see in 5 or 10 years' time, you know, if I could do a global review, see how the situation has changed on the back of that.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. So the show is called Prospecting Purpose, as you know. I want to ask you what purpose means to you for the mining industry, for closure, from your perspective and experience.
So in terms of the mining industry in general, the main purpose of a mine is to convert geological wealth into financial wealth for investors and miners, at the same time providing raw materials for consumers. Okay, but I think we can modify that purpose a little bit. We can still reward investors and miners for taking the risk of developing a mine, but at the same time internalising some of the environmental and social costs that the rest of society has to pay for, improving practice so that progressive restoration and community development happen in a meaningful way throughout the life of the mine, and return a valuable society and environment to local people when the mine finishes.
Well, that's all for today's episode. This is Liz Friel on Prospecting Purpose. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, Pete, so much for being our guest today.
And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you want to learn more, check out the show notes for links on all that we covered today. See you next time.